So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker for this evening. His name is David Fine, and he has come to us from Florida this morning to spend what has been a really exciting day, and now it's going to culminate in this talk. David is the founder and the former president and CEO of Cyterra, which is a leading producer of landmine detection. Prior to that, he spent quite a number of years, I think you said it was 28 or 23, at Thermo Electron, with his most recent post there was the VP of R&D, their R&D center. And now he's getting involved with a new company called Geno, and he'll probably tell us a little bit more about that. So he's got just a lot of experience in starting businesses and leading businesses, and I think he'll have a lot of interesting things to share with us tonight. So let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you, Anne. I excuse the spelling in the word technology. I want to talk about Cyterra as an example. Just a bit of an outline of the company and its background. We started in July 2000. At that time, Thermo Electron had gone through a lot of reorganization. The founder had been let go, the founder's brother had been let go, and the company was shifting around. And at that time, I was just started to run a new R&D center, and we realized that R&D was not going to be part of Thermo Electron's future. And we were then able to take a core group of people who'd been with the company. I'd been there 28 years. Some of them had been there. I had two people who'd been there even longer than me. And in lieu of giving us any payment for leaving, we were able to negotiate a position where we took a couple of small contracts with a couple of $1 million, some ventures, some equipment, plus the promise that we would take on the liability for these contracts. The contracts, one was in a fledgling mine detector program, another one was with the Department of Energy, and we promised that we would complete those contracts. The concern that the company had at the time, at Thermo had at the time, was if those contracts were abandoned in the middle, there'd be a liability. And on that basis, we were allowed to leave, took this with us. We had a receivable of about $1 million that hadn't been paid yet because we just started the R&D center and it had been incorporated. And so we set off on our own in July of 2000. We raised an additional about $600,000, initially $650,000 from our own employees. And our employees were all engineers. We had about 10 people at the time. And they didn't know what an employee-owned company meant. To many of them it was, we all own equal shares, and they're all part of the management decision. And in fact, they'd worked it out what the percentage split should be, and it amounted to 200% of the company. And it was very serious. It's kind of a laughing matter now, but they really believed this was the case. And when we asked about money, raising money, they didn't understand that you needed money to float a company. But finally, we only lost one person in that dispute, and we were able to launch the company. And we had three technologies that we were pushing. One was a technology for mine detection using radar and metal detection combined. The second one was in the explosive detection arena. At Thermo Electron, we had founded the ability to detect explosives at airports, and the equipment you use today came out of work we had done in the late 80s and early 90s. And another area, which was in the area of nitric oxide inhalation therapy, had just been approved in 2000 by the FDA. We had a lot of background in it from working with NO-based explosives, nitro-based explosives. And those are the three technologies we started the company with. We sold the company in March of 2006, just over a year ago, 2 years ago. And we sold it for $120 million. We had virtually no dilution in the company because we were able to do it without any outside equity. And we quite literally created 19 people who were made over $1 million in the company. And the initial investment that they put in went up 84 times. And I just want to go through with you some of the lessons we learned and how to do it again in the future. And then in March '06, when we separated from, when L3 bought us, the one part that had been on the back burner, the NHO inhalation, we launched that as a new company, which is what I'm doing right now. The technology history. I'd been developing new instruments. Many of them were based on NO and NO2 chemistry, which is the basis of explosives, nitrosamines, many other things. That naturally led into explosive detection. If you're working in explosive detection, that led into mine detection. So that's the sort of parallel. And if you're working in mine detection, you're obviously interested in other technologies. We got together with people who knew about radar because we realized that was a good way to go. The NO detection led to NO inhalation therapy. And until September 11th, we went on all of these three in parallel. When on September 12th, we decided to stop the work on NO inhalation technology and focus on the other two areas. And the basic founding of the company was to develop technologies for use in a war against terrorism, which we recognized even in 2000 was just a matter of time. We told the Army at that point in time we had this minor program that we could accelerate the program, and that accelerated the mine detection arena. We also developed a see-through-the-wall radar, which I'll describe in a moment, where we can see through multiple feet of reinforced concrete and see a person at rest on the other side using radar. And we developed a new explosive detector, which hasn't seen the light of day yet, which you'll be seeing in airports fairly soon. So we were, technology-wise, a powerhouse. We did a lot of things in a very short time. And I'm going to go through why some of that happened and how we were able to do it. Some of the products, the main ones that actually went to market, there's a mine detector here, which is the type classified by the Army as the ANPSS 14. Type classified means it's an Army issue, like an F-16. It's not, you don't describe the name of the manufacturer, it's the Army's issue. This is the new explosive detector on the side here. This is a new walk-through explosive detector built for high-speed rail. This is a new see-through-the-wall radar handheld, which has now been type classified. I don't know what the new formal name of it is. The other products, we were working on them, and they're still proceeding, but they're not yet at the commercial stage. Cyterra's goal was to obviously maximize shareholder value. Every employee was a shareholder. We gave them options, and at various times they could buy shares. Initially, the initial founders bought shares, and at 3 times more in the course of the company, we allowed people to buy shares. We had 0 conventional financing. We had no venture funds. We had no outside funds. We didn't even have a line of credit with a bank. Just no dealings with the outside financial community. We did one exception, Massachusetts Capital Resource Corporation, a semi-state agency, gave us a loan of $1.5 million, which we kept in the company and returned at the end of the period. That was more backup to make sure that if we got into a tight problem, we would have some backup. And $10,000 invested, and many of the employees at the beginning put in $10,000 or more, returned $840,000. And the key to that was no dilution. So the employees, an engineer in the company owned 4 or 5%. Now in many companies, when you start off and you've got venture money, the entire management team may own 5%. So that was the difference here. And that was a very, very important aspect in many, many ways. The next part was, how do we finance this? Many of you who are in research, many of the faculty here, you got research contracts and grants. That's what we did. We used those research contracts and grants, and there are thousands of companies in this country that get government contracts. We used those contracts, and instead of just doing, I call it mindless research, just continuing to do research for the sake of research to get your next program, we only accepted work and we only went after work where there was a product at the end. We could see a mine detector, we could see a through wall, we could see a bomb detector. If it was just to understand technology, didn't touch it. If it was just a service, you wouldn't touch it. It had to be something that we could see could go somewhere. And then we treated that money as if it was our own money, just as if it was venture money. It paid our salaries, it paid our overhead, it paid the rent, it paid the computers. Not only that, it paid an extra 10% went into pay for our own IR&D, our internal ideas, which had nothing to do with the contract. Plus we earned a fee of about 8% is what the government allows you to do. We took the fee and put most of it back into the company. We kept some just to make sure we had the discipline of being able to feel that we were making a profit. And we made a profit. In fact, 23 of the one quarter we missed. We didn't make a profit. Every other quarter for 5.5 years we made a profit. The funds like this are available all over the place. Many of the faculty I've met with today have grants and contracts. And it was just focusing these grants and contracts in a way where we could get them to pay for our programs. We had contracts from a variety of agencies. If I can go around with them, US Marines funded our through-wall radar, and they bought our mine detectors. The Army funded the mine detector program. TSWG funded some of our explosives work. DOE funded some of our early work. TSA funded the remaining part of our bomb detection work. The Navy funded some of our mine work. DARPA funded a lot of the through-the-wall. And the Department of Justice funded some of the some radar-based systems for searching people. Let me see if I can get that off.
You want to take a few minutes and download that software?
As I said, the contracts paid everything you need to have to run a company. We were very wary of SBIRs. These are small business grants. And the reason we're very wary of them, they're very easy to win. You write an idea and there's a money set aside for you for small business. And they're not that difficult to win. There's typically 80K the first year and you can go to 400K second year. But they do a lot of damage. It makes it easy to win. And if you've got a business built with a lot of SBIRs, you're unsaleable. You can't sell yourself to anybody because a big company comes to buy you, they're not a small business, and they lose all their grants. So we found it was much better to compete in the real world. We're a good technology house, we had great technology, and just ignore the SBIR field completely. That's almost heresy in this field, but I've seen other companies that have got a lot of SBIRs, they married to the SBIRs, and it's now 8 years later, they started the same time we did, and they're still floundering around trying to find a product. Because the SBIRs, you get your money whether it's a good idea or not, and it doesn't really get you anywhere. It just churns, it's just churning money. It's just not really doing very much, and we stayed away from that, just almost in those words. We took it as a drug. You don't want to get hooked. Stay away from it. It's easy to get money there, but it's what do you do with it afterwards? Patents are a very important issue. A lot of people don't want to take government contracts because what about patents? Never been an issue. In 28 years I was at Thermo Electron, and the last 6 years at Cyterra, never been an issue. What we do is we have ideas. We go and speak to folks, decide we're going to submit a proposal. Even before we speak to somebody, we submit a patent, a provisional patent. It costs $1,000 to submit it. We write a proposal in response to a request for proposal, maybe a government inquiry, or maybe it's a special one that we've been asked to submit. The same day we submit it, we file it as a patent. Just the whole thing is a provisional patent. That protects you. You own, at that point in time, all the ideas that are in that proposal. Every single one of them is now yours. The government has rights in the data that it generates and any new patents that may come from there. 2 areas. If it's data, what do you care if someone else sees your data? You got the patent rights. They can't practice anything with it. Secondly, if new patent ideas come from what you've done, and there's a great idea that comes out of it later, which typically does happen, it's useless to anybody else because you've got the primary patent. They can only practice it if they've got authority from you on your first patent. So we've never ever run into a problem. Lastly, you own the commercial rights anyway. The US government has a license for it, which you always give them. It doesn't cost you anything to say you'll sell it to them. That's essentially what you're doing. You're selling the product to them. You own all the commercial rights in the US and all the commercial rights overseas. And overseas includes government agencies overseas. So the patent side, where many people don't want to go into government work because of patents, it's never been a problem. You just make sure you play it by the book, that you're open, you file your patents, and you disclose everything you're doing, and everything's fine. The federal government, in fact, likes this approach because it gets new technology out there quickly. They guaranteed whatever stake they have in it, and this guarantees entrepreneurship. This wasn't the case about 20 years ago. It changed I remember under Nixon, dates me a little bit, that when you got a contract, the government owned it all. And that just killed innovation, because why take it further? And that's gone away more than 20 years. Management. To make a high-tech company successful, you've got to have very, very good people. And very good people are typically folks like you here. You're very bright, you're very innovative. You also got big egos. A lot of you do. Most of you do. If you're successful, you generally have big egos. And you've got to try and pull these together and make people work together. We did this in a number of ways. Everyone had an ownership stake. They had a good salary, the equivalent salary that they'd get at Lockheed or somewhere else, maybe a bit more, a few dollars more. But they also had ownership. And the ownership was a very important part. So you were able to get these people to work together. And the most important part was each one was an exception. In a large corporation, you can't make an exception for everybody. In a small startup, everybody's the exception. There's no standard. Everybody you're doing something different for. You get to know them, you invite them to your home, you get to know every one of them, what makes them tick, what makes them want to be there. And you pander to that a little bit. You have them in all the meetings. But you make it known that, number one, technical decisions aren't made democratically. There's no such thing as democracy in a technical meeting. I would often have people come to me, they've had a meeting and they've decided to do something. And I'd ask if it was unanimous, and they'd say, no, Joe didn't agree. Well, then you don't have a decision, because he may be right. It has no meaning how many people voted for it or against it. You've got to understand the technology. We'd review it again, and very often Joe was right. So having a debate concluded with a vote in a technical area is absolute nonsense. You can't do it. The one lone guy may be absolutely right. You don't know that. You've got to find out whether someone else has to come in and review that and make a decision. We made every engineer feel they were the key guy. I had people come into me all the time saying, but I'm the heart of this company. And I'd say, fine, you are the heart of the company. You wouldn't be where we are without you. But what about Pete down the hall? What is he, the brain? Someone else is the lungs. And they'd complain about someone else down the hall who was absolutely not doing his weight, and they described he was an absolute asshole. And my response would be, the same response was, just think where you'd be without an asshole. You wouldn't have an organization either. You've got to have an asshole. We set a very clear goal in the company that we were going to try and sell the company within 5 to 6 years, which we were able to achieve. This was our management team, and I put it up as photos of the folks as when they were kids, because you've got to run the company that way. You've got to be fun to come to work. You're playing in a sandpit with a lot of different ideas. And Bill Steinway was the key radar guy who kicked off the mine detector. Greg was the key engineer. Larry Perry here was a Marine trainer. We hired him. He was selling cars, just got out of the Marines. But his job in the Marines was training people how to work mine detectors. Well, he came to us and he's got a 20-man group now doing training around the world for mine detection. Joan is the production manager they're producing 400 machines a month at the present time. But you bring these people together, and it's got to be fun. And that's why I like to put a picture like that up of the folks as kids. And it makes them realize that if it's not fun, it's not going to work. And it gets around some of the friction too, and you say, wait a minute, when you were a kid, you didn't do that. Managing outside the box. If you're going to be number one in a field where everybody is trying to do something, you've got to recognize that conventional wisdom isn't going to get you there. If it was easy to find mines, as an example, everybody would have done it. You've got to think differently. You've got to think differently in your technical aspects, your strategic aspects, and even your financial aspects. We just didn't accept anything as dogma. We just challenged everything. We didn't use conventional equity funding. We used the federal government in a way where there are thousands of companies that can be converted into a kind of what we did, because they're out there today with very good engineers, but not really getting anywhere. They grow at 1% a year, 2% a year. It's very difficult to grow. You grow a contract, another one goes away, you grow a new area, and things are changing. We intentionally worked very hard with the government to make them real partners. We set out to be the best contractor that they could ever have, so that they were very, very happy with us, so that they wouldn't want to switch. We didn't dilute. We didn't think we were able to accomplish that right through the end, but we were able to build a company without diluting. And the advice I was getting, the conventional advice, in the beginning of the formation of the company, the first several years, 3-4 years, was all my friends and colleagues were saying, it looks successful right now, go out and raise some money, you'll never know when you need it. And we could have raised money and given away 30%, 50% of the company, and had $10 million in the bank. Or what would we have done differently with that money in the bank? And did we really need it? And friends of mine who were running companies went out and did that. And some of them have been successful. They've sold their companies, but they've only got half or a quarter or a third of what they should have got, because they didn't really need the money. We made profits, as I said earlier, in our quarters, 22 out of 23 quarters. We set out to make a profit, and then we sort of gave it back in and plowed it back into the company. We also did whatever it took to motivate these engineers. The engineers are the heart and soul, engineers and scientists are the heart and soul of a company that's high tech. And you have to pander to them, you have to keep them happy and keep them pulling together. In fact, when we sold the company, a large company that bought us, L3, couldn't hold that together. And a lot of it has flown apart because it's a different management style. If you're $12 billion in size, you can't manage it the way you can manage a small startup. Technical failures. I've made a habit of calling engineers into my office, new engineers who'd been with us maybe 10 months a year, done very well, everything they'd tried was working well. And I'd call them into my office, and we'd have a discussion on the lines of, looks like you're not cut out to be a research engineer. And they'd be flabbergasted because everything they'd done had worked well. And I said, you're not on the forefront of knowledge. Everything you're doing is working. You're not taking chances. You're not a researcher. You're a conventional engineer. If you really want to succeed in a high-tech, innovative company, you've got to make mistakes. Don't go out and make intentional mistakes, but you've got to be on the forefront. And if you're not on the forefront, testing the limits of technology, you're not an innovator. And half the people got this lesson, the other half thought I was crazy. So the business model was to be fiscally conservative. We had no high salaries. We had no perks. We had very strict governance. We had an outside board of directors. We had annual financial audits in addition to all the government audits. We had normal full management control. And part of that reason was if we were going to get bought, we wanted to make sure we had an audit trail by outside auditors from the very beginning. We changed the fiscal year, so we did multiple audits that year. Just made sure that when we got bought, we were transferable to a company without them going through a lot of hell, because everything was already subject to external audit by outside auditors. And again, folks in the outside world said, why are you doing that? You should milk the company. You're the management team, take a lot of money off the top. None of that, just everything was plowed back, very open. The earning a profit again, we didn't worry about the profit. The profit was just there so that we could say we made a profit and then intentionally plow it back in, as opposed to losing money. And it's very important if you're running a company that you say you're going to make 8% and then you take it intentionally and fund some programs, as opposed to making, say, 1%, and that's all you can do. This way you've really gone through the exercise of making the money and giving it back. Some of our hardware, and then I'll go into some other areas, our mine detector. And the mine detector really started to happen after September 11th. It was an idea. We had one working some of the time in tests. We told the Army we could deliver them production units in 13 months. And we convinced them to go ahead with that, although it was 3 years ahead of schedule. We were able to do that with parallel engineering and production getting ready at the same time. The Army paid for all our production hardware, our production facility, all our production tooling, everything we needed to produce those units. They wanted them in a hurry. And at the end of 2002, there was September 11th, we got a contract at the end of the year. At the end of 2002, we delivered 214 machines into Afghanistan, which are still in use. And once you do that sort of thing and you move heaven and earth, the customer will believe anything you say, because you've done what they consider a miracle. We're not a conventional company that could have got a lot more money in the R&D stage. We weren't interested. We wanted to get into production quickly, and this was a great way to get into production quickly. These pictures, this one is Afghanistan, Bagram. This is Afghanistan, this is Iraq. This is Iraq. You can see them using the mine detector, which is here, for finding buried, those are howitzer shells, buried munitions in the ground, finding spider holes. We gave the Army credit. The Army liked this program. We were always in the background. Here's an Army website and the Army Engineer magazine. We're not mentioned, but our product is. That's all the recognition we needed. We didn't complain about it. We didn't say anything about it. We were just thrilled that that happened because we got the credit. Everybody knew it was us. As I said, this credibility is important. And the other part we did with the mine detector, the Army had a spec. And we exceeded the spec. For example, they decided that they wanted to find 95% of the mines. And we thought about it and said, we can't do that. That means every time there's a mission and 100 people go out there, 5 are going to be injured or dead or killed. You can't have a product like that. We have to make it 100%. Of course, the Army liked that. Reliability. The Army spec was 400 hours mean time between failures, where when I left we were at 1800 hours. Most importantly was ruggedness. The Army spec was in its padding and protective case and knapsack. It could fall on any angle from 4 feet on a concrete and survive. We passed that test. The Army came to inspect it, and a conventional company, they passed their test. We said no. Guys, take it out of the backpack and now drop it. And it broke. And the instruction was fix it. It took about a month of engineering, which we had to pay for because we'd already met the spec. No other company would do this because it's not part of what the government wants. You could get another $100,000 to do that. But we had a mine detector now that could take a fall of 4 feet on concrete at any angle, which is the way it's used. It's thrown in the back of a Humvee. It's thrown off the back of the Humvee. So it's a rugged piece of equipment. Once you do that, the customer starts to like you and goes along. We always delivered ahead of time. When we had a delivery schedule, when the schedule was delivered, we continued building at our own expense. Again, a no-no if you're a government contractor. We continued building, knowing they were going to buy. So when the next purchase order came through 3 months later or 6 months later, we had all the machines in inventory, and we delivered ahead of time every time. And the government, the Army, didn't have another contractor like that. We did this because when it came time to getting the big production contract, which was about $380 million, there was no way they were going to go with anyone else. They never had a contractor like us. And that's why we performed like this, that they was just so happy with us, they would do anything to make sure this contract was awarded to us, because we were already delivering so far ahead of schedule, and everything worked. By the time we sold the company, we'd shipped about 1,000 units. Now I believe it's 5,000, 6,000 more than that. I was at a party there about 6 months ago when they'd shipped number 5,000. I think the Army's ordered 20,000. And in fact, this equipment can find a mine under any soil, under any conditions, using radar and metal detection, anti-tank, anti-personnel. It's a solution to the handheld problem, not the general solution on a large field. You've got to go up and down a field at a fairly slow pace. But Cyterra trains every soldier that uses this, and every Marine that uses the equipment is trained by one of our people. And the company has several people stationed in Baghdad right now, in Afghanistan at Bagram, doing the training. Not a job I would relish, but the only folks we hire are recent former military, who for some reason I can never understand or want to go back into the military as rapidly as they can. We also supported the Army's humanitarian program. You may not know it, but the US government supports a lot of humanitarian mining, demining around the world. And in this program, which was in Namibia, and we've been to ones in Cambodia and other countries, we provided our people free, provided the equipment. The results that came out of this, comparing with all the other mine detectors, were just fabulous. It was the best advertising we could get. An Army report coming out with international competitors, run internationally. I mean, you can't get better advertising than that. Through-the-wall radar came about, if you think about it, you're in this room, your cell phone works in here. Why does it work in here? Well, it's cell phone frequencies, it's getting through the walls. So you can turn that around and take those same cell phone frequencies, put a pulse out, and you'll get a response back. You need about 1/500th of the power of a cell phone. Once we recognized that, we realized, hey, we could make this work. We found that the Army had funded a variety of programs. They'd spent about $100 million in funding programs to develop this. We tried and failed to win those programs. DARPA came out with a program where they wanted some advances on this, and they had a test out, a shootout, where we had 3 weeks to go on site, 1 minute training, and then a soldier would test the equipment. And we had to find it within a certain speed. And our chief engineer said, no, it can't be done. I've tried, that's it. We just hired 2 new engineers, a radar engineer and an algorithm engineer. And they came to me and said, there's another way around this problem. We know how to do it. They needed 2 weeks, 3 weeks of work, including going through Memorial Day weekend. They needed technician support and about $20,000 of equipment. Well, that's not something I can resist, despite what the head of engineering says. They were prepared to sacrifice nights and weekends to make this happen. Naturally, they were very successful at doing that. And the test was just what happens when you can get a small company working like that. We went to the test, we set up our equipment, and it was set up to beep. And as soon as anyone started, as soon as we got there, it was beeping all the time. And they were about to kick us out. We said, no, it's so sensitive, it's beeping. So they got everyone to stand still, and it still was beeping. It was pointed at a building. We said, well, what's in the building? Oh, their offices. Well, get everybody out. This is supposed to go through the building. We had made it too sensitive. It went through about 4 walls. They cleared everybody out, and then it started to work. And whatever they do, they couldn't fool it. If the people would go into a corner of the room, find it. In the other corner, find it. Stand still and move a finger, you'd find it. And they had a stopwatch to see how long it took. Well, we were doing it in Doppler radar instantaneously, no calculations. And so we won that contract. We were the only winner, and that led to what's now the Army's handheld through-the-wall radar. That can only happen in a company like that, where you let that sort of innovation happen. And those 2 engineers are innovators for life. I mean, as you can imagine, they've got a emotional high that they'll never forget. This is the new explosive detector. Explosive detectors at airports today, which we developed back in the late 80s, are specific for certain explosives. And in the last many terrorist attacks have been different kind of explosives people didn't know about. I got to be careful how I say this. We've developed a detector that would find all explosives, irrespective of the mixture and irrespective of the chemistry. Essentially the way it works is you heat a sample, even if it's in the nanogram size, and if it's an explosive, it starts to give off energy and then pops or goes away, but you get a thermal response. That's exothermic. It's giving off energy, whereas normal compounds, when they decompose, don't give off energy. So if it gives off energy and a lot of energy, even in the nanogram size, you can pick it up with a high-speed infrared camera with multiple pixels. Very simple concept. We had this working. We had the turnstile you see on the side, a high-speed turnstile. You'll go through it in about 6 seconds, sampling your shoes, your hands, and your chest. As you walk through those doors, it's sort of taking a sample from all of it. When L3 came and we were deciding whether we should sell ourselves or not, they saw the mine detector working. They saw the through-wall radar working. This was working, but it wasn't a commercial success yet. It wasn't successful. We got the value as if it was successful, because this is a revolution new product in this field, and you'll start to see it this year in airports. I think TSA are going to use the shoe scanner first. The shoe scanner part of our system will go into airports first. So again, in generating value, you didn't have to go through and make all this happen. We didn't wait until we got the contract for $380 million to sell the mine detector. We sold it just before we got the contract. So someone buying us saw the value out in front. And that was a lesson I learned a long time ago when I was at Thermo Electron. One of the companies we started, the first spin out of Thermo Electron was about $10 million in sales, and our stock market valuation, at least per share basis, was $33. About 8 years later, we had grown it successfully to $300 million, and the value of the shares was $8 a share. It has grown successfully. It was very successful. We developed the bomb detector, the artificial heart, the first artificial heart for human use, and yet the share price was way down. Dilution is what killed it. We raised a lot of money, but we were so diluted, couldn't support the stock price. And the first price was based on the promise of what people are greedy. They see a new technology and they believe it'll do anything. So the fundamental philosophy: exploit superiority, combined with your conservatism. Bootstrap with the federal government. You can do it. I'm not sure we would have gone much faster with our own money, with a lot of outside money, I should say. And you got to motivate people who are difficult to manage, but they're super achievers. They got big egos, but without them, you're going to go nowhere. You need those people for the breakthroughs to make your technology happen. And then we motivated for growth. We didn't motivate for EBITDA, for earnings. We were solely driven by going as fast as we could. This is the last slide. I've said it before. Probably the most important part of it is the last item. You got to recognize that if you don't have technical failures, you're not succeeding. So when failures happen, don't make sure they're the same twice, and don't make sure people are being idiots about it. But if they're really pushing knowledge, it's okay. Encourage it. That's how you learn. Pointed out it was a very good time for stocks like this. They thought they could get as high as $75, $80 million for us. We had sales of about 20 million at the time, 18 million. And we were looking at this tremendous opportunity of the big contract, the mine detector. The bomb detector was coming along but still needed money. Things were ripe for selling on the promise of fabulous future and delivering the future after you sold. And we decided, well, if we could get 80 million, we'd sell it. If not, we'd continue. And we met with a group of investment bankers and liked the chemistry of working with them. And they worked us very hard to make it happen, as you would imagine. And they ran an auction where they prepared a prospectus. We went out to, they mailed out about 80 copies of it. About 20 companies wrote back that they were very interested. 20 of them made about 16 made initial offers, and then some of them were 20 million, 30 million. And then there were a few there were 4 or 5 who went up into the high numbers. And then finally we sold to L3. It was a cash deal, no earn out, just straight cash. It's a very difficult step. The other part of that, people always used to ask, well, what do you want? And I said, I can't tell you the number, it's what the market will bear. You can't say what it's worth.
One side is saying physically conservative, and the other on the other side seems that you really supported the innovation. So how did you balance that so that not every innovation gets supported and taken to the next level, but the right one?
It was unusual to do what I did there in that situation, because I got a senior VP very upset that I didn't follow his advice, because he was my trusted advisor in radar. But I told him I couldn't resist it. When some engineers are going to tell me they work through nights and weekends, I'm going to let them. We never went negative except for one quarter, so we always made a profit. But we did that several times. Some of the stuff didn't always work. And but if you don't take the chances, you don't know if you're would have been successful. So it's a difficult gamble, but you never risk the company on it. I mean, I can't really say it another way. It's is it rational? The decisions are all technical.
Who was making these decisions to say, okay, I have 10 innovations in front of me, four is the right one to take it to the next level? Okay, is it a management board or is it a joint engineering board?
What I would do is have the key engineers responsible. We'd sit down in a conference room. But I'd make it clear at the beginning I wanted their advice. And everybody understood they'd give me advice, but I'd make the decision. And they shouldn't be unhappy if they didn't agree with the decision, because I would have to think about it. They would at least give me the input to make sure that we could make a rational decision. So I made the decision. But very often someone else had a very good argument why it couldn't work or technically was wrong, and we didn't fund it. We only funded it if it looked solid. And if the engineer at the time, the head of engineering, said it can't be done because I say so, and you got to listen to me, but he didn't have a technical reason, I couldn't listen to him. He had to give me a technical reason. He couldn't. He just said, in my experience, there's no way, I've been in this field 30 years. Well, that's not a technical reason. Now, tell me a reason why. Give me a logic. And if someone can't do that, then but you know, there's one of Murphy's laws that says something like that. If someone who's been in the field a long time, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, tells you something can be done, he's almost certainly correct. If he tells you something can't be done, he's almost certainly wrong. And this is something I've seen many, many times. The technical guru of the field who's been there and knows it, and who's the expert, if he says something can't be done and a young student comes in and says, I can do it, and this guy says, you're wrong, can't be done, I've tried everything. You better not listen to him, because he's usually wrong. As long as he doesn't have a technical reason. If he's got a good technical reason, then you go with him.
Business that's basically small, and a lot of the R&D we are using right now is for service. We don't actually have a widget or a project or doing the type of products that you're working on. In a service-based organization where most of the standards in place are based on conventional wisdom, would you say that using an unconventional wisdom as an approach to building that type of business, is it as successful as in the example you've been using?
A service is tough because you're providing a service based on a spec usually, and that spec is the rules, and I don't know how to bend those rules. That's very, very tough, particularly the government, because they got a spec, you're working to a spec sheet, you're working to a particular code, and if they say they want to do this test, you have to do it whether it makes sense or not. I think that's too late to innovate. You can only innovate in the earlier stages. I don't know how to innovate in that situation. It's a good business to run, and you can grow it, but I don't know how to. I don't think technical innovation comes in. It's got to come in an earlier stage. Let me give you an example of that in our explosive detector, this new one that I was describing. It does things differently. It finds bombs in a totally different way. It's not a chromatographic thing identifying a compound. It's identifying an infrared signature. Is it thermally positive or negative? It's radically different than anything else that's been tested. But the government specs are all based on those earlier systems. So if you try and compete based on those specs, it'll fail. You've got to go into the government, teach the scientists what you're doing, have them work with it, have them play with it, have them understand that it can find any explosive in the world instead of just a few, and then they'll change their spec to meet it. But otherwise, it's too late. I think you can do anything in the service area.
How might your strategy have changed if September 11th attacks had not happened and the U.S. military was not as active? What would you have done? How would you change? What would you have done with your technology?
The mine detector would have gone at a much slower pace, the pace that the government had originally programmed it to go. So only now would it be going into first production, probably. They had only programmed a few hundred units by 06 and going up slowly. It would have been going at a slow pace. The security part of the business, the bomb detection, would have gone at a much faster pace, because what happened is after September 11th, for 2 years there wasn't a single R&D dollar out of TSA. What they did is every scientist, every dollar went into hiring new people, buying the big CAT scan X-ray machines, training everybody, bonuses. For 2.5 years there wasn't a single R&D dollar. We lost all our R&D contracts, and our operation, which was half in Waltham, Massachusetts and half in Florida, we shut down our technical side in the Boston area because there was no work. And the few people left, we just kept an admin base there, and the rest went down to Florida because that side just got killed by September 11th. It came back 3 years later, and we won 4 contracts, and that's what built up that security business. The other part that changed was the Geno project on NO inhalation, which is the company I'm running now. We would have pursued that more aggressively, and that's probably as big as Cyterra. So we would have succeeded differently. We probably would have spun that off as it was so radically different. But now it is a separate zone spin-off. And incidentally, it's owned by those same shareholders of Cyterra. Since that was part of Cyterra, they started off owning a share of that. And then we've raised more money from people who wanted to put in money. But it would have, I don't think it would have changed the success. Would we have sold by now? I don't know. I think you just play the cards that are dealt to you and try and deal with them. But I think the bomb detector part would have gone much faster, and that is much bigger than the mine detection side. I mean, mine detection, the U.S. Army is going to spend about $400 million buying these mine detectors. That's 80% of the world market. Bomb detection is $5 billion business. It's a much, much bigger market we would have gone after. We got bought by a company that's the major supplier of bomb detection equipment in the US, L3. All the CAT scan X-ray systems, or most of them, are made by L3. And that trace detection equipment is going into their new X-ray systems too, so it'll be combined trace and X-ray.
Well, you have a very interesting model here. You're very fortunate to be able to have a fellow government having the need for the technology. But are you really suggesting that the average entrepreneur who might be in this room going out and start seeking government contracts for their ideas instead of going to venture capitalists, that is, prospective pharmaceutical engineers and prospective software engineers, prospective biotech engineers, well advised to go seeking federal contracts instead of going to Wall Street for venture capital and seeking angel investors? Is this model for everybody?
No, it's not for everybody, but it can be for far more than just us. Because
I
listen,
got the impression by putting up what you put up in the last slide that you were saying exactly that.
let me give you an example of say, some of the pharmaceutical side. You can get a lot of your initial R&D done with your government grants. You don't need angel financing. If you've got some ideas, get some grants, get credibility, get your patents filed. If it's important enough, if you can find, say, a military application or a TSA application or a first responder application, they'll fund the whole thing. If it's not that way, no. If it's a high-tech area where there is a need, or there could be a need, you can get some of it or a lot of it funded. A lot of stuff, obviously not. If you've got a new drug that's just a new drug, or you're developing something, some software that's in a banking arena, no. But if there's an angle that you can make that it would help solve a key problem where there's a need, a national need, it could be in security, could be in military, could be in cyber software. There are funds out there that you can go and get that and take it a long way and minimize the dilution you would normally have in going to angel investors and starting out from scratch. And I've seen other companies where I've looked at them and they've seen our model, and I've told them you could get that funded. Why are you doing it that way? Obviously, it doesn't apply to everybody. It applies to some, but you want to think about it. It may steer you into an area where you build a smaller pie, very much smaller pie, but you own it all. It's just different. You've got to think it through. Conventional wisdom.
Potentiality, if the shoe fits, take it.
If the shoe fits, go for it. But most people don't even consider that shoe. That's what I'm really trying to get across. Not that this is for everybody, but explore it. And if it fits you, or you could make it fit, or you could change it, when a few years later, however long it takes you, you're going to be that much better off. Even if you land up with venture money, you've taken it a long way and they haven't funded your very basic stuff. You're already in a strong position. You've got patents, you've got people excited, you've gone a long way down the road. Even if it's an NIH grant.
Can you walk us through the one-day, $1,000 patent process that you do? How does that work?
The patent office has a process called a provisional patent. Works as follows. You can do it on your own. You've got to typically you should get guidance from a patent attorney at least the first time. You file anything with them. It's not read or reviewed, but it's dated and stamped. You've then got 12 months from the day you file to make an application for a formal patent. A formal patent can cost you $15,000 to $25,000. But you've got patent protection from the day you file that. You also have protection internationally from the day you file. If you decide after 12 months that you're not going to pursue it, you lose that date, but it's only cost you $1,000 maybe. And it gives you time to think through, do I want to do this? Do I want to invest that money? But you got your protection immediately. Now to file a patent, what's called a letters patent in the legal jargon, is a month's undertaking, and it's to make the first filing is probably $10,000, $15,000, and then it goes through the various processes. But over a 3 or 4 year period, it's cost you $25,000. That's a long process. Provisional is just a filing, and there's proof in the patent office that you invented. No one can argue with it. It's in the patent office. So at a later date, 2 years later, another company comes along and says, no, I beat you to it. No, you filed there, your papers are sitting there, and it's available to be looked at. It's abandoned and destroyed if you don't file a patent within 12 months. And typically what we would do is file 2, 3, 5 provisionals, and then a month before that expiration date, our patent attorneys, we sit down with them and decide if we want to follow this or not, and we can use all that data we've been filing. And we get the date of our first filing, of the first provisional. That's our invention date. At least that's the date we filed. Our invention date could be earlier, but at least you've got a filing date out of your hands, not relying on your notebooks. It's in the patent office. And it's a very cheap process. It only started about about 8 years ago. Before that, you couldn't do that. And a lot of patent attorneys don't like it because they like to get the patent fees up front. This way, you file a lot of provisionals. But I've made it and several companies now will give you that advice that you should do it that way. File provisionals.
I mentioned earlier that I own a company and I'm in the process of hiring employees. However, I'm the sole owner 100%. And if I want to motivate employees to have the same type of energy and team and synergy that you described, instead of giving ownership, is there another way to motivate employees and somewhat have the same type of environment fostered?
When we gave options, we gave people some shares, and the options are a golden handshake, and they work well. They work as follows. You give someone the ability to buy shares, you've got to set a value of your company. And you're saying to this person, here's 1,000 shares you own. It could be, say it's 1% of the company. If you stay with me 1 year, you get 1/3 of them. If you stay with me 2 years, you get 2/3 of them. If you stay with me 3 years, you get 3/3 of them. You get them all. If you leave before then, if you leave after 9 months, you get nothing. If you leave after 1 year and 1 day, you've got the right to buy those shares if you wanted to put the cash out. Otherwise, you lose them. So you're holding good people because they think this company's grown a lot. Its sales are up. The boss is good to me. We may be able to sell this one day. I own some percent of it. And if it's a small company, you've got to give him some of the profits, etc. But he's motivated. He's with you now. And it's his company, his ownership. And you're holding him as well. It's not just he owns it. These are options, and maybe they vest in 7 years. So for 7 years, he hasn't put out any money. It hasn't cost you anything, except maybe some ownership part of it. But you've got a highly motivated employee who feels he's got a salary, he's got a job, and he's got something else. And this is the building block of many, many technical companies. I mean, the innovative companies typically go this route. There have been some tax law changes, so you need to, in the last few years, related to options. Mainly larger companies now have to declare them as understand the tax implications, but we use them a lot. We gave away in options about 20% of the company. The other 80% was people who actually bought their shares and laid out cash, and 18% were motivational.
Do you give large salaries and the shares?
We gave large salaries because we had to compete with these guys. In our case, we were competing with the Lockheeds of the world. We were competing with engineers and scientists who are the least sophisticated financially that you can find. Most people, like Stevens is probably different because you're much more of a business school, but if you've come out of a lot of engineering schools, they know nothing about the business world. And they didn't really believe it, but they knew about it. If someone coming out of Stevens would probably be very motivated by options. Someone who doesn't know what they mean and hasn't worked with them may not be as motivated. It's a mixture. You've got to make sure it's the right person. Someone coming out of a business school knows what an option is, and it can be worth a lot. And if you're successful, it's worth a lot more than salary. And you don't mind because they made you successful. And the view of options, the only way you do it is because by giving out those options and maintaining those good employees and making it worth their while to stay with you, you're the beneficiary. Because they work that much harder. And you've got to think, if that's not the case, you don't do it. But if you think you can motivate them to really work hard and make this succeed as a team, and you really need them, then it's worth it. If that's not the case with each individual business, it's not worth doing. But we didn't give up equity to venture groups, but we gave up equity to key employees, and they benefited.
Along the same lines of ownership of employees and options and ownership of patents, speak to your concept of building a model towards selling the company versus going towards income and receiving larger funds and building it.
Well, I view the running a company for income, it's the mom and pop business. Okay. If you build a company for income, You're generally more stable. Your income has to be high. You don't take risk. It's a very different model. It's you're building it like a mom and pop operation. You're the local grocery store, and you're building it, and you're making income. If your goal is to build a chain of grocery stores, then you're going for the equity play. If you're going just to make profit out of that one store, then you go for income. If you're going to go for building all these stores, you're much better off taking your profits and putting them back in the company. We had discussions in the company with this. My controller didn't agree with that. He thought it was better to take the cash while we could. What do you mean plowing $1 million back into R&D? Are you nuts? We could split that among, just on a percentage basis among the ownership, and we'd all have got our investment back. And I resisted that because I knew we could put the money back in and grow the company. And by growing the company, they got a much larger stake. They would have got a fraction of the money out if we had put money back into the company. So it depends on your confidence, your growth, what you think you're going to go. If you've reached a stable point, you go for equity. I mean, for giving out dividends. But otherwise, if you think you can do better, I mean, why do people go and get equity money? Because they need the money to grow faster. So if that's your model, don't take that money and pay it out as dividends. You take every penny you can get and reinvest it. Until you've reached a plateau where you've decided, you now own the world mine detection market, and you're going to just be flat and steady, and sales aren't going to change. There's no way they're going to change. Then go to a dividend. There's someone else over there. Could you say the question again?
As far as knowledge management, is any advice that you would regard within the company?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
As far as knowledge management, I mean, the people involved in the compensation, what would you suggest?
I'm still not understanding what the question is.
You also mentioned the patents as far as protecting your whatever inventions you do, but as far as within the company,
Yeah.
would you suggest anything as far as knowledge management, when you lead people, making sure the knowledge is not distributed among all of us?
We made very sure that people realized that when they came in, they signed an invention agreement. We were a government contractor. We were a classified facility. We could only employ U.S. citizens, not green card holders, because our equipment was classified. Not the equipment, but some of the research was classified. So we were, security was a very important part. Not everybody had a security clearance, but you had to be able to be cleared with a security clearance. Many of us had secret clearances, some of them had higher. But it was run as in that sense, people signed agreements, couldn't distribute information. And let me go back to the mic. When you're selling equipment overseas, like we were selling to even the United Kingdom or Australia, they're US allies. But there are ferocious laws about exporting without permits. So we made it a rule that no one could send emails overseas, no one could send anything overseas. If you have an idea and you send it overseas and it's sensitive military or could have sensitive military applications, it's considered an export. It's a crime. It's a felony. So we have very strict laws in place in a company that's doing work in the defense area or related to defense, or anything that could be construed as defense. You've got to make quite sure you don't violate those laws. We had one of our administrators was pretty much on top of that. When we shipped equipment overseas, even our mine detector, we couldn't ship it to the British. We had to get an export permit. The export permit had to show that it wouldn't. They had to tell the U.S. government what they were going to use it for, even if it was for a trial. And an export permit to the United Kingdom took 6 months to come through. The U.S. government holds you to the fire very, very tightly on that. Even worse now since September 11th. Even to the US allies. We wanted to ship a unit to Australia who are working with us in Afghanistan on the bases, and they were going to use it on the bases, on American bases. It took about 2 years to get the first export permit. So you take that very, very seriously. Knowledge information in a company that's a high-tech company, you take very seriously. So it was more a matter of putting the fear of death into anybody about putting the fear of going to jail, about talking about the technology. We didn't have to worry about it leaking out of the company. They were more worried about the FBI knocking on the door, because they couldn't talk about it to their friends or anyone else.
I think I saw on one of your slides that thousands of companies are operating under a similar model or pursuing similar funding. Do you have any statistics that might highlight success, failure rates of these types of things?
There are lots and lots of companies, the Beltway bandits all around Washington. There must be a whole host of them in this area. And it's fairly easy to go out and get an R&D contract from the government, and you start a small shop. It covers your overhead and G&A, and you make a small fee, and it becomes, you keep the income, so you've got a reasonable business, and you try and build it up. There are thousands of these companies doing a lot of work for the government in various good and bad areas, and just thousands of them. I don't know of any that use the model that I used, which is to not be concerned with making that extra profit and being hard-nosed about it and doing no more than the contract asked. The contract said the spec was to drop it 4 feet on in its package. Well, that's all they asked for. We weren't even allowed to spend the government money to take it further, because that's the rules. We had to use our profit dollars or our overhead dollars to do that, a different pool of money. But people would say, why did you do that? Let's wait a year. That'll be our new proposal for next year. Now, if you're running an R&D company, that's how you think. And that's how all these companies think, and that's how they're taught to think. Whereas our philosophy was, I want to get it out there fast. I want this thing to survive. I don't care about the contract next year. It's much more important to get it out 6 months earlier. And that's thinking of the money that you're getting as venture money, as opposed to Uncle Sam's money. It's just a different mentality. And since most of our engineers had come out of Lockheed, that's just a major employer in our area, it took a while to get people to accept that, because that wasn't the way Lockheed did things. It wasn't the way Boeing did things. It's not the way other major companies do things, or small companies, because they want to get those dollars, and they're available to get the next stage and the next stage and the next stage. When we started the mine detector work, our own group of people, I went to them and said, well, do we have a good mine detector? And the answer was yes. Is it better than anyone else's? Yes. Well, let's make it a product. Oh, no, you can't do that. We'll have to deliver a product. Well, is it better? Yes. Is it perfect? No. Well, what'll happen if we miss a mine and we kill somebody? That's true, but what'll happen if we don't send it out and they use the current equipment? They're going to kill a lot more people. And it was going through that analysis to get people comfortable that, yeah, this was better than anyone else's. Well, then let's try and make it a product. And once you make it a product, you've got to get away from, you either go to venture money to carry you there, or you can use the government, but you've got to think differently with the government money. But if the government paid our entire production line, as they would do for a new battle tank, or they do for an airplane or anything else, your profits are monitored. We can't make more than, on the production contract, I think now they make about 10%, and it's very closely monitored. We were making about 10%, something like that. So on a commercial business, you'd never dream of making a profit that low. You want to make much higher than that. But there's no selling expense. You're selling one trip to Washington, you've sold your units for the year. So there's no selling expenses. It's just a different. It's different from. I know many R&D companies, and you must know many of you in this room here must know companies like this in the area. Even in the faculty here at the university, you do work like this. You can convert one of those programs into this kind of thinking, if there was a thought about wanting to do it and if it made sense.
When you develop these new technologies and these contracts, the government owns the rights to the technology and to what you develop, right? Can they then take that and give it to, say, like a Lockheed and say, hey, we want you to manufacture this giant production run?
No.
Take the $300 million contract, or does that happen?
It works as follows. You own the basic patents. So for them to do that, they've got to negotiate with you. if you're not performing on your contract, they've got the right to do that, for the government can do what it believes is in the best interest of the US. If you decide, this happened with the new armored vehicle that's going into Iraq, the first company couldn't deliver them fast enough. They gave the contract to someone else.
So key to your company's success was operationalizing in addition to innovating.
Yes, you had to make sure you could deliver. And we had to make sure we were the best contractor, because we were in a unique situation. We were their only contractor in this field. We had beaten out all the others. The others couldn't perform in the various shootouts we had. We were the winners. And now we had a special responsibility as the only contractor. Everybody wanted that production contract. But they were so happy with us, there was no reason to change. We were innovating all the time. We were both innovating, although you had to stop innovating once you're in production. But we were delivering ahead of time. What more can they ask for? Our prices went down every year. We didn't negotiate it down. We just said, this is our cost. They're coming down.
The point you bring up about the government contracts is very true. I looked into that just a few months ago to try to get certified to investigate. It's definitely the industry. In my example, IT is extremely oversaturated. It just so happened that when most engineers lose their jobs, the first thing is they open a business and they go to the government. So what you have is a huge pool of companies and independent engineers, until at least they get a job, they become a business owner. And so you have a huge competitive market going after the government contracts. The process is, you really have to be committed. Have a person in your company who can spend the time going out, networking, finding out who the primes are on these contracts. And it's not easy, at least in my industry, to get a government contract. And like you mentioned, you have to definitely perform or they will take the contract away.
You have to perform, and you have to, I would spend a lot of time doing that. I hired other people who did that. It's a full-time government contracting officer we had who would make sure we obeyed the rules to the letter. If you're doing government work for the government, as you probably know at the university, particularly on a contract, we were audited once a week by different government auditors would come in. We had a room available, a computer, and they would come in and ask for anything. And you've got to produce it. So if you're doing work with the government, you've got to have an open book. Everything is available to them. They have a right to inspect it. If you're selling privately and you're selling a product to, you're selling a computer, no one has the right to inspect anything. You can charge what the market bears. In the government sales, you can't. When we sell our mine detectors to a foreign country, we can charge what we like. If we sell it privately, we can charge what we like. But if you're selling it to the US government and they funded you to do it, your costs are very, very controlled, every step of the way. And a lot of people don't like that. That's another reason people like to go to venture money, because if the real market is not government, that's a reason to go to venture, because you can then set a price that's not controlled by anybody. The government, the price, government pricing, you got to obey those rules.
The other problem I have with the government is it takes them too long to pay. I have colleagues that got government contracts, and basically what happened was they used up all their own private money. It took a long time for the government money to come through. So meanwhile, the company had already went bankrupt before they could meet the payroll. So you have to be...
No, I don't agree with you. There are ways in the government. We got paid. Our average receivable from the government was 14 days.
How'd you do that?
We had some good people who can do that. We got paid very, very quickly on computerized payments. Every 2 weeks we got our payments. You can do that. There are ways you can do to get that set up automatically. There are occasions where it went wrong, particularly on a new contract. There was a wrong number somewhere, but generally we were down to very, very short payments, which helped a lot. We didn't need as much money.
Hey everybody, I think that about concludes the time we have provided for the talk, but I think that we'll linger for a little bit. If you have some additional questions, why don't you come up and talk to them? And I want to thank you all for coming. I also want to let you know that this is part of a lecture series. It's called the Roy Heath Lecture Series. Roy Heath was an alumni of Stevens, and he has supported this lecture series to help us better understand leadership, and particularly the area of technology management and leading technology companies. So anyway, I welcome you to come back to future Heath Leadership Lecture Series, and also we run an HSATM colloquium that could be interesting as well. So if you provided your contact information up front, we'll be sure to notify you of all those events. Thanks a lot for coming.